Welcome to Courage to Heal, a podcast where we explore the battles we wage within ourselves. I am your host, Anna Kandrueva, a psychotherapist and a mental health advocate. This is Season 1, Episode 6, Bipolar Disorder Type 1. Hello, dear friends, and welcome to my episode on bipolar disorder type 1. It's important to understand that bipolar has several types because they can be expressed so differently. To be diagnosed with bipolar type 1, you need to experience a manic episode. By comparison, people with bipolar type 2 go through hypomania, a less severe form of mania, along with depression. While depression is not necessary for the bipolar type 1 diagnosis, most people with this type still experience it. In fact, the entire disorder, regardless of the type, is mostly depressive rather than manic or hypomanic. Mania causes severe impairment and tends to have very negative consequences for the person experiencing it, including hospitalization. Let's look at the possible symptoms. These symptoms would have to persist for at least 7 days for them to count as a diagnosable manic episode. First, you have elevated or irritable mood. People with bipolar 1 can feel very grandiose about themselves, with an overwhelming and undefeatable sense of self-confidence and self-importance. They often report feeling on top of the world and unstoppable. Note that irritable mood is just as likely with periods of extreme irritation for no apparent reason. Secondly, people in a manic episode will have a decreased need for sleep while still enjoying plenty of energy. They can sleep as little as 2 to 4 hours a night, or even not sleep at all, and still be able to go about their day in a tireless way. They will also experience a flight of ideas, or incredibly rapid thinking that's impossible to stop or slow down. Mania can make them distractible and impulsive, taking risks without appropriate reflection on possible bad outcomes. Common ones include spending a lot of money or engaging in risky sexual behavior, also referred to as hypersexuality. People in a manic episode will start tons of activities and projects, often getting lost in a new hobby or a grandiose idea like writing a book or starting a business without any pre-planning. Their energy and rapid thinking will contribute to a frantic nature of these endeavors. Last but not least, mania can cause rapid talking, which is difficult to interrupt, also called pressured speech. At least 3 of these symptoms will need to be present for the diagnosis, unless there is no elevated or irritable mood, in which case you would need 4 of these symptoms. Another thing that can happen in bipolar type 1 is psychosis. Psychosis consists of delusions and, less frequently, auditory, visual, or olfactory hallucinations. Psychosis can lead to paranoia and an idea that one is being persecuted or followed. Finally, I will mention agitation. Agitation is a feeling of uneasiness typically accompanied by excessive talking or purposeless motions, such as pacing, wringing of the hands, or restless legs. It can cause a lot of discomfort for the person experiencing it. Mania is usually severe enough that other people can notice something is off. Friends and family can be the first ones to be able to tell that mania started because the bipolar person themselves can be quite unaware and enjoying the elevated mood. Like I mentioned, depression is also common in bipolar type 1, although it's not necessary for a diagnosis. People can also experience mixed episodes, where some symptoms of mania are combined with some symptoms of depression. For example, you may feel energetic and irritable with a sense of guilt and worthlessness. People with bipolar 1 often take medications because of its severity. They cannot stop taking these medications when they feel better or more stable. If you have bipolar type 1, it is very important to compile a list of your warning signs, also called prodromal symptoms. These symptoms are subtle signs that a manic episode is starting. You could notice yourself needing less sleep, becoming interested in new projects, or calling more people than usual, or maybe having an increased sexual desire. One client of mine notices herself looking at online sales and coupons with increasing frequency before mania takes over. It's also important to know your triggers, events and situations likely to set off a manic episode. Some common triggers include a lack of sleep, substance use, and significant stress, which can happen even from positive events like a wedding. Once mania is escalating, you will likely need the help of others because it will be hard to rein yourself in. That's why it's important to have an ally, a trusted loved one who takes the time to learn about bipolar symptoms, knows your warning signs, and feels comfortable gently confronting you when they notice mania starting. Of course, not everyone has this luxury. Some people choose to write down a mania contract, which is a document listing your triggers, warning signs, coping skills, and people you trust to help you out during this time. It should also contain contact information for your medical team. I am including a downloadable version of this manic contract in the show notes. If you have been hospitalized before, or if you are worried it might happen to you in the future, you may want to keep a hospital bag packed. You most certainly won't have the time or wherewithal to pack one when manic, and your loved ones may not know what to bring. Some things to include are clothes without drawstrings, shoes without shoelaces, such as flip-flops, socks and underwear, personal toiletries, and a piece of paper with important phone numbers. You can also bring books without spiral binding or metal rings and unframed photos of loved ones. Know that hospital staff may not allow some of these to be in your possession. It's up to their discretion. One last thing I want to mention is that there are several studies on the benefit of dark therapy for mania. This involves being in a completely dark room, especially during the hours you would normally be sleeping. Since this is unrealistic for most people, you can use amber or blue light glasses instead. They more or less mimic being in a dark space. One promising study had people wear these glasses from 6 p.m. until 8 a.m. unless they were asleep. This slowed down or completely stopped the progression of mania. Please consult with your doctor before using this or any other method on your own. I hope this gives a good overview of bipolar type 1 and gives you some jumping off points to help manage mania. As always, let's listen to someone with a lived experience to really know what it's like. Today, I am talking with Megan Recipio, a mental health advocate who lives with bipolar type 1, anxiety, and PTSD. Megan believes in spreading awareness about her mental health struggles through her Instagram account and podcast interviews to help others feel supported and not so alone. Megan, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Me too. And Megan, I wonder if you could get started just by telling my listeners a bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, definitely. I am 35 years old, but this is my birthday month, actually. So I'll be 36. And a little fun fact, my birthday is March 30th, which is World Bipolar Day. And it's also Vincent van Gogh's birthday, which I think is pretty cool. So every year I get to celebrate my birthday and then also have, the World Bipolar Day awareness on Instagram and kind of celebrate that day. So I think that's pretty interesting. Yeah, I've been married now for almost 12 years and I have two boys who are 8 and 10. So they definitely keep me busy. I work as a teaching assistant at a high school part-time. And I also teach ice skating on the side. So I do a lot of different things. And I also actually have my own business. I make like home decor pieces and furniture. So yeah, just a little bit about me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And Megan, just to get right into it, how did you first find out that you had bipolar type 1?
Well, I got diagnosed 3 years ago. I have been in therapy for about 6 or 7 years now. And so my therapist definitely knows me very well. and he witnessed my first full-blown manic episode. And it was something that obviously he had never seen in me before. So it was a huge red flag. And I remember asking him about it later and him saying that it was like I was barely sitting on the couch. I was like floating and like I had such a flight of ideas and I was all over the place and he couldn't get a word in edgewise. And I was delusional and so yeah, that's definitely how it came to be. It took a couple of months for me to get my official diagnosis. I think because between my therapist and my psychiatrist, they didn't quite know what was going on with me because I always had depression. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. And so I always had depression and struggled with that. Um, and I never really found any treatment that worked for me. I tried so many different medications and, I was in therapy and I even tried TMS and nothing really worked. And so whenever, he witnessed the full-blown manic episode, it kind of started the ball rolling on looking further into that. And then I was manic for about 2 weeks. And then the following week, I crashed into a major depressive episode. And I was also very delusional and had psychosis. And so that was very out of character for me. And so eventually I got diagnosed and I was so like almost sort of angry with them for like tiptoeing around me. I think it was because I was delusional too. I felt like they were like talking about me behind my back and not letting me know what was going on with me. I just kept asking like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Like I was so confused and didn't understand. But yeah, it made sense once I finally kind of received that diagnosis. It was hard, but it made sense. So
Right, absolutely. A lot of people find it very hard, of course, to even just hear those words. You have bipolar. And some people also do find that it's a bit of a relief to know what's wrong with them. I wonder if that was the case for you at all.
yeah, definitely. Because I feel like the years prior, I had many, severe depressive episodes and definitely some highs that I couldn't really explain. And so it made a lot of sense. It was definitely shocking to hear your psychiatrist sit you down and be like, okay, Megan, you have bipolar 1 disorder with psychotic features. It took me quite a few days to process that, but, and it was overwhelming, but like I said, it just kind of fit and made sense. And I was able to do some research and, kind of put the pieces together. And I even bought Bipolar for Dummies to kind of get, some knowledge on it because nobody in my family has bipolar. So it doesn't stem from that. And so it was completely a new thing for not only me, but for my family to deal with as well. And so I definitely wanted to inform myself as much as I could and inform them.
So it sounds like you were depressed for quite a while and then you had that manic episode. So I wonder, what are some of the adversities you faced because of bipolar, both before and after the manic episode?
I've definitely faced a lot of adversity. Being in a depressive episode, just it strips you of everything, all hope and all like, I just wanted to not live anymore. It was the lowest of the low. And um, my thoughts were just all over the place. I couldn't function. I have two kids that need taken care of. And so my family had to step in and help support me. It was all I could do to get out of bed. That's a huge thing, a huge burden to lay on somebody, and you feel that guilt and shame. But when you're in that low, you don't see anything else. You can't see past it. All you see is just like the darkness. And um, I've struggled a lot with self-harm and alcohol abuse disorder and things like that because of having, depressive episodes and bipolar and mixed episodes and whatnot. So there's definitely been a lot of things that I've struggled with because of it. And yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of more things, but those are like the main ones that I can think of right now.
Right, certainly all very common. I myself struggled with alcohol abuse and everything you've named, self-harm, guilt, shame. I hear that all the time. And once again, when I was depressed and when I am still sometimes getting depressed, those are very relatable things. Yeah. So Megan, I wonder if you had a chance for a do-over since, you didn't even have the diagnosis before, what would you have done differently, if anything?
Well, I don't know if I could have done anything differently because I was already in therapy and I was already seeing a psychiatrist. And so I was already doing those things proactively, and bipolar just kind of hit me out of nowhere, you know? But one thing, I became depressed at the young age of 13, and I never spoke up about it to my parents or to anybody that I really trusted. And I really, really struggled. And I had a major loss, which was so traumatic for me. My grandfather passed away, and I just didn't know how to deal with that grief. And that just really turned into, depression for me. And I just didn't know how to speak up. And I wish that if I had a do-over, I would go back and say something about my mental health and get the help that I needed sooner and not struggle for so long. Because, I mean, at that young age, you don't really understand and you don't really have the words to explain what you're going through. But I wish that I somehow found the courage to do that, because it wasn't until much later that I sought help. And I kind of did that on my own when I was like 18 or 19, after another major trauma in college. And so, um, yeah, I would definitely advocate more for my younger self.
That makes sense. I feel that's how a lot of people feel who do start having those symptoms early on. It's hard. It's hard when you're so young to even understand what's happening and to speak up for yourself.
Yeah, it really is. It's hard to have a voice when you're that young and don't really know what you're feeling. I mean, you don't learn about it in school really, and so you don't have any understanding of it, and it doesn't make sense. But I mean, I would just wish and pray that I wouldn't wake up, and no, teenager should feel like that and without any sort of help, and I kind of wish my parents saw that in me, and they kind of, they didn't. And um, so that's something that I've definitely had to process, like not getting the help that I needed sooner. But I mean, I think things work out in time. And whenever I was ready, I did, seek the help and I did, find my voice. But it definitely took a lot longer than I think it should have.
Megan, you already hinted at, your manic episode, what that was like, but just to get a bit more detail, what is it like for you to experience mania?
Well, I experience mania in like different ways. Sometimes my last manic episode was actually pretty mild. Red flags for me are just more of the obvious ones of like not wanting to go to sleep. It's the last thing that I want to even think about. I refuse to think about going to sleep. And I have tons of energy and I start all kind of projects and just don't want to stop. Even if it's the middle of the night, I'm just working on a million different things. And so that was kind of my last manic episode. But I've also experienced psychotic mania where I I had a trauma with my hand. With my business, I use power tools. And so I was using a table saw and the wood kicked back on my hand, and I broke my finger because it got caught in the blade. And so that trauma was so big. I think that's what set off my bipolar. And I was convinced that my finger was not mine, that the doctors had made a mistake, and that it was something that only I could fix, that nobody else could fix. I was convinced that, my finger was somebody else's, um, and things like that. And it was really confusing for me. I've also experienced a lot of euphoria while being manic. I remember sitting on my back deck at like 4 or 5 in the morning a few times and seeing just like neon lights all over the yard, or like shooting stars, and they're like surrounding me, and just feeling mesmerized by it. And so there's been, definitely different variations of it, but also scary hallucinations. I would be convinced that there was a man in my attic, and he would walk around, and like, of course, where my bed is, he would be like right above my bed in the attic, walking around and standing there. And I think that had a lot to do with my trauma in college and kind of, putting the two together. Um, and so definitely the hallucinations of seeing things out of the corners of your eye, hearing things, hearing your name being called, and you're home alone, and, you hear things like that. And, um, I've seen people in my house, and I get very paranoid. So yeah, so definitely, I've experienced it a lot of different ways, but the psychosis it it's a hard one, because it could be very mesmerizing, like I said, and kind of amazing. You're feeling on top of the world, but it could also be really scary. And so that's definitely something that I have faced numerous times.
That's so interesting. You mentioned that particular delusion. In a different episode, I reveal that I had the exact same delusion that a man was living in my attic.
No way.
Absolutely. My husband had to show me the attic, first of all, and show that there's all kinds of insulation there that would make it impossible for somebody to live there.
Uh-huh.
And then just convince me over and over again. And I would hear a noise and I would say, oh my God, that's the man.
Yes, that's what you think. You hear their boots walking on the floor, above you, and you're convinced that there's somebody up there, and nothing's going to change your mind. Even if you go up there and check it out. Like for me, it was like, no, you can't, you're not changing my mind, so that was really scary. I haven't had that feeling for a while now. I think I've kind of processed a lot of that, but yeah, for a long time there, that's how I felt, and and I was definitely terrified of it.
Yeah, I can most definitely relate since it was the exact same delusion.
Yeah.
And Megan, to go from mania to depression, first of all, you mentioned that depression got triggered after your manic episode. Do you usually find that that's the case? Because I find that to be a pretty common thing that people share.
Actually, not necessarily for me. The last time I was manic, which was a few months ago, which was like the milder version of mania for me this past time, my psychiatrist and I worked immediately to up my mood stabilizers and get, my medicines on board. And I think we really caught it in time. And so it didn't get full blown. And so I think because of that, I didn't crash into a depression this time. But in the beginning, early on when I was diagnosed, I definitely would always have a depressive episode after mania, and it would last for months. I mean, it's no easy thing experiencing that, going from mania, that such extreme high to such an extreme low. I mean, you're in this dark abyss and it's just awful. You can't even explain it. And if you've never experienced it, I mean, I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Right. And, you know, for bipolar type 1, of course, all you need is mania to be diagnosed. But depression is absolutely a feature in it as well. A lot of people, I think, don't understand that. And depressive episodes tend to last longer. And overall, bipolar is more of a depressive disorder in the sense that 75% of episodes tend to be depressive rather than manic.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that definitely makes sense because, I've had so many more depressive episodes all throughout my life and not quite so many highs. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting fact.
Yeah, and Megan, you also mentioned that you have PTSD from some past trauma. I actually did an episode on bipolar and trauma where my guest said that for her, her trauma made bipolar symptoms worse. So I wonder if you find that that's the case for you as well.
Um, yeah, I think it definitely does. Because you're trying to process your trauma and, I work really hard in therapy and um having bipolar and not being aware of what mood cycle you're going to be in makes it hard to process those traumas because if you're constantly swinging up and down, you don't get to that stable place where you can really do the hard work and discuss the PTSD. You're more focused on the episode that you're in. And so that's definitely difficult to manage both. Um, I think that having PTSD, well, I wasn't diagnosed with PTSD until I started therapy about 6 or 7 years ago. I didn't know that I had had it. I had all these symptoms, but just kind of never sought help for it. Never even thought that I had had it until, I started therapy. And then when I got diagnosed with bipolar, it just definitely added to the chaos of it all. And definitely living with anxiety as well. Um, you're worried about, you're always worried about the other shoe dropping. When am I gonna change into, a different person, because of an episode. And so you're anxious about that and worrying and trying, I try not to project, but it's hard not to, especially after coming out of mania and thinking like, oh my gosh, now I'm going to crash. Your anxiety really gets the better of you. So having all three of those combined is just torture sometimes.
Oh, yeah, I can only imagine. Thankfully, I don't have PTSD, but I do have generalized anxiety disorder in addition to bipolar. And I can relate to that, you know, being afraid of what's going to come next. I will be very open. I get a bit of anxiety every time before I record a podcast episode, and I have to do a bit of breathing. And a lot of people think, well, you're a therapist. You should be able to not have anxiety somehow magically. But it's something I live with. And for me, the difference is I have a lot of tools to handle it, but it still very much arises. So I can relate to what you're saying as well.
Yeah, yeah, you can have the tools, but I mean, your body's still going to do what it's going to do. You have that fight or flight response or just something just comes out of nowhere and you can't really control it. And it, I think I've managed it pretty well in the past few years. It was really out of hand. Um, a few years ago, I ended up hospitalized for severe anxiety and depression. It was my first hospitalization. And it just got to be too much. I couldn't handle it. I was staying up all hours of the night, which to me, I wasn't diagnosed. So to me, like that was, a kind of a precursor, like, oh, that was maybe an episode I was having, but nobody caught it. And so yeah, there's always that fear and that worry, but I manage it pretty well with medications now. So it's not as hard all of the time. It used to be all the time, but now I can kind of sense it and be like, okay, this is what I'm feeling and kind of process it and, kind of try to move past it.
Right. That all makes a lot of sense. And you keep mentioning, you're on medication, you're doing therapy right now, and you're doing pretty well. So what are some of your biggest challenges now?
Um, well, I think just continuing what I'm doing, going to therapy, taking my medications. I think just day-to-day life is, a challenge in itself, taking things one day at a time, even 1 hour at a time if you need to, 1 minute at a time, if you're really struggling. Finding the right medication combination is also a really big challenge because like you'll think you'll be on the right medications and then the bottom will drop out, and then you'll kind of have to start over. And that's always a bit frustrating. And it's such a process to start something new, see if it works, see if there's side effects. I definitely struggle with a lot of side effects from medications. And so that's always been a big challenge for me as well. Um, Weight gain, especially, and that really hurts my, self-esteem and, my kind of sense of self-worth. And so that's something that I still need to work on, that I need to understand it's not my fault that I have these side effects. But it's also something that bothers me and I need to work through, and it's not fair. You want to just say, why me? Why do I have to deal with this? Like why can't I just take this magical pill and I'll feel better and I won't ever have to change it. So yeah, so that's definitely a big challenge. Um yeah, but I mean, like I said, I think I'm on the right path with just doing what I'm doing now and sticking to my routines and just trying to take it day by day.
Right. It certainly sounds like you're doing a fantastic job of that, coming back from hospitalization, psychosis, all of that mania, and being able to be, more or less stable. Because I understand I consider myself stable, but I still have slight hypomanic episodes here and there, slight depressive episodes here and there. And I'm glad you mentioned this concept of a magical pill, because I feel like that's what a lot of people who don't have bipolar think we have, is that you just go to the doctor, get a prescription, and then you magically don't have any symptoms. And they don't understand that it can be a years long process. For me, it took 2 years to find the right medication that, still had side effects, weight gain that you mentioned, absolutely. And there are even worse side effects out there that I was, lucky enough not to experience. Very good point that there is no magic solution to bipolar and that we go through a lot in order to try and be stable.
Yes, most definitely. It's certainly a frustrating process and it takes a while and it takes perseverance and not giving up and sticking to your appointments and being open and honest with your psychiatrist and all of that, which is hard work. It's not something that comes easy. So, yeah, I'm definitely an advocate for therapy and medication. I know it's not for everyone, but for me, that's what works. And so I'm just going to keep trying.
It's a great attitude to have. Same attitude that I have. That's all we can do, right?
Right.
So Megan, do you feel like there's any, or are there any strengths or benefits to having bipolar?
I think having bipolar allows you to feel things on such like a much deeper level than than other people. Not everyone gets to experience life that way. And so I think that's definitely a positive to having bipolar. I know you feel the lowest of the low, but you also feel um, the deeper emotions. And I think people with bipolar are definitely more sensitive to other people's emotions and can empathize with their struggles. And that's a huge strength, I think, for us with bipolar. Um, it's so important to be kind to one another. And I think that having this illness kind of gives you that kindness for most people because you understand how bad things can get, how dark things can get. And so you see things a little bit differently. Um, for me, too, I think I'm way more creative because of my bipolar. And I know you can't like people attribute, bipolar and creativity and stuff. And I know that's not like a fact or anything, but I really do think that has a lot to do with it. I love to write and I love to make, pieces of home decor and all of those kinds of things. Those are huge coping skills for me. And I think that if I didn't have bipolar, I think I wouldn't be as passionate about those things. And I think everybody needs to find something that they're passionate about and kind of cling to that. So yeah, it's not all negative. There's some positives and strengths, to having bipolar.
Definitely. That empathy you mentioned and kindness, I feel like those are really big elements because having been where we've been, it's a lot easier to understand people who may not have bipolar, but have some other kind of mental illness and struggling with that. And Megan, to go back a little bit, because there was a question that I wanted to ask but forgot to ask, is a lot of people I interview and I myself talk about bipolar anger, and some even refer to it as bipolar rage, where you just get these angry moments where anger feels very uncontrollable and you don't want to hurt anybody, your loved ones, but words come out that are just mean and hateful. And later you feel deep shame about it. I wonder if you can relate to that at all.
Um, a little bit. I had like one episode where I had like bipolar rage, and I really haven't had an episode like that since then for years that I've been diagnosed. So it was kind of really unsettling for me to feel that anger over seemingly nothing. I mean, I remember I was putting my boys' clothes away and the hangers that I would put the clothes on didn't all match. And so the ones that weren't matching, I was flinging them against the wall, like so angrily. And I have no idea why, but it just made me so angry. And my husband is very sarcastic and likes to joke. And the kids and him were like teasing and saying, oh, like, I forget what they were saying, but something about, oh, like, we don't like mommy, we don't this, something like, about me, just teasing. And I remember just like flipping out on them. And they were so like scared and like upset and like confused because that's so out of character for me. Like I don't scream at my kids. And that same time too, someone reached out to me, a family member, and sent me a text message that just set me off. I was dealing with a struggle with my son and his health. And I just kind of lost it on them as well. And so it was kind of all in that same same time period, that same episode. And I had a big poster for my business in my office here. It's called Handmade by Megan. And so I had a big poster with, Handmade by Megan on it and everything. And I was so proud of it. And I remember ripping it off the wall and just cutting it into a million little pieces. And just with every like cut, I just felt better, but also worse. And, I look and I'm done and there's just pieces of paper all over the floor, and I'm just like, what did I do? And it was just very out of character and very confusing. So, but luckily I don't experience that on a regular basis.
That is certainly lucky. And once again, I can relate. I've had those kind of angry episodes. And I do find that with medication, with therapy, with, things like mindfulness, I am able to control myself much better.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think without it, it would be a lot worse.
Megan, you mentioned medication, you mentioned therapy. What else helped you along your journey?
Definitely my writing. I'm writing a book right now. I'm writing a memoir. And so I love to write. I think it's so freeing and so therapeutic, just to get all of your thoughts out there. And for my book, to be able to tell my story, all of it, the good, bad, the ugly. It's kind of like sharing your diary with the world almost. And it's kind of intimidating to think about in the future. But in the meantime, it's something that I really enjoy doing, and it really does help me because I can get those racing thoughts out on paper and out of my head, and can kind of have a clear mind and feel better, especially when I'm trying to sleep and I can't because I have racing thoughts, and I just can't, like, I'm too wired and I can't settle down. It's definitely a good time for me to write. And I just will take a note card or a journal or whatever and write the date down, and just whatever thought comes to my mind, I'll just write it down, even if it doesn't make sense. Even if I don't finish like the word, or if I'm manic and I'm just writing like, super fast, or, you name it. But that's definitely a huge coping skill for me. And with my Instagram page, I mean, I love, the inspirational quotes, and I'm, trying to inspire positivity in people and hope. And that makes me feel really good. I feel like if you touch one person's life for the better, like it makes you feel better. So yeah, so those have been great tools for me to help manage, my symptoms, my bipolar. But definitely, like I had said before, like therapy, I'm definitely a huge advocate for therapy.
Do you find that there's any particular kind of therapy that's the most helpful?
I think I do like CBT therapy. So yeah. So, but I mean, it just feels like a conversation, it's just so easygoing. So I think it's just having that rapport with your therapist and feeling, like you're validated and your thoughts and feelings and heard. And it's so, so important. And I'm so lucky to have, to have found someone like that where I feel that way. And, my therapist has watched me grow and evolve over the years, and really lets me know that and tells me that, and, kind of boosts my self-worth a little bit, seeing how far I've come.
Yeah, for my listeners, CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, and it is considered to be quite effective for bipolar, especially the depressive side of it. And Megan, I'm really glad that you mentioned going to therapy for quite a long time, for years, because a lot of people go when they are in crisis and then stop going and maybe don't find it as helpful. But absolutely, I myself have been going for years. And that's how I feel you should be using therapy. I understand not everybody can do that, but that is the most helpful, is to keep going even though you are not experiencing any kind of crisis in your life.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because then your therapist gets the full picture of you, not just you when you're in crisis, and suffering. They get the good side of you too, and they get to see you in all different lights. And my therapist definitely has, from my happiest high highs to lowest lows to panic attacks to you name it, he's seen it all. And I think that paints such a bigger picture for the therapist to be able to help you in your journey in healing.
And Megan, to kind of start finishing up here, what do you wish people understood better about those of us who live with bipolar?
I had someone one time who I told that I had bipolar, and they said to me, their response was, "Oh, I thought you were normal." And so I was kind of like, "Oh, okay." Um, so I wish people understood that there is no normal. Everyone is healing from something, whether it be bipolar or not. Everyone has something that they're going through. And so I really wish people understood that, you're still, even though you have a label or a diagnosis, you're still you, you're still a person. It doesn't define you, you know. But I mean, living with bipolar is really hard. It's definitely like a roller coaster. And I know a lot of people say that, but it's such a great analogy. There are such high highs and such low lows. And it's really hard. It's something that is a constant struggle, and you have to stay on top of it, and you have to manage it and find something that works for you. So again, I think showing kindness and grace to people with bipolar, especially when they're in an episode and doing things that are uncharacteristic of them, is so important, just to get more understanding and awareness about it. I think, is so crucial for people. There's such a stigma around it. You hear the word bipolar and you think, such negative things, and it's not true. Everyone experiences it differently. So I think that, yeah, I just wish there was a little bit more understanding and more grace surrounding it.
That makes sense. I also wish for that. When you said that, somebody said, I thought you were normal. I myself had a visceral reaction to that because, oof, yeah, that one hurts when people say that. So Megan, any last words, anything that we haven't covered that you would like my listeners who live with bipolar to know?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely want people to know that you're not alone. A lot of people have this, and there's a great community of people who can support you. And although sometimes things can get really dark, there's always hope. And I think it's important, like I said earlier, to find something that you're passionate about and kind of cling to that, whether it be um, anything that it could be, but like, and then therapy and medication. If you're, interested in that, I think that's super important. Just be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself, be gentle with yourself, love yourself for who you are, and not, beat yourself up about things. Life's hard enough, so we shouldn't beat ourselves up, in the meantime. And yeah, just try to continue living your best life and be the best version of yourself. And you're gonna have good days and bad days, but there's always going to be light at the end of the tunnel. And so yeah, I definitely want people to know that.
That's a great message. I love that. That hope is so important. So many hopeless days, so many days when you feel like there is no light at the end of the tunnel. And to hear somebody else with that lived experience say that, no, there is. It really is possible to get a bit more stable, to have a good life, to have kids, to have a business, to be writing a book, all of the things that you're doing. And having said all of that, where can my listeners find you to find some of these things that you're doing?
Yeah, my Instagram is at thisismegan_r. So you can find me on Instagram. I would love to, chat with anybody if they wanted to, or have them check out my post. And yeah, it's a great place to reach me.
That's great. And you mentioned doing home decor. I wonder if you are on Etsy or any other website for that too.
I actually have an Instagram page for that as well. It's Handmade by Megan 1. So yeah, so if anybody wants to check out my business page, they can certainly do so. I post, you can, um, I post things that I make all the time and custom orders for people. And I'm actually working on things right now to ship out. So yeah, definitely check that out.
That's wonderful. Lots of options. Um, and yeah, Megan, thank you so much for being here today, for sharing your story. Your honesty is really powerful, and I think it goes a long way towards ending that stigma surrounding bipolar and mental illness in general. And I want to encourage my listeners to follow you on Instagram at thisismegan_r. Because you share wonderful and supportive content that really helps us all feel less alone.
Oh, thank you so much. That means the world to me.
A big thank you to everyone listening to this episode. Please subscribe and leave a review to help me spread awareness and shatter stigma surrounding bipolar disorder and other mental illnesses. In the next episode, you will learn about bipolar type 2. Until then, take care and stay courageous.